today's topic is on neurodiversity, specifically on masking. I just want to say that we could have selected other neurodivergent conditions, but we decided to talk about mostly ADHD and to a lesser extent autism. So that's what most of today's talk will cover. First, a short introduction from myself. So I'm Tijana. I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also an executive coach and an applied neuroscientist. I specialise in supporting people who work in high pressure environments and with a further specialism in neurodiversity. I'm a member of ANA, so Applied Neuroscience Association, where I also run the special interest group. So this conversation, we can continue it within the community. So I welcome you all to join and we can carry on talking. And I think one final note from myself is that I am not neurodivergent. However, I have two very close family members who are, so I have quite a lot of experience on that side. And I also have my lovely guest today, Fabienne. Thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to be interviewed. So I'll let Fabienne introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Fabienne. I put a lot of things after I am, but the two things that are the closest to my heart are I'm a recovering teacher, so I used to teach languages and I have taught languages across all of the spectrums from nursery to adult education. And most of my career has been in higher education. I used to be French language director at the University of Bristol, and I've now resigned from my position and I am doing a PhD in the School of Education at the university, looking at the lack of well-being in education. So I'm about to go through progression. I'm in my second year and I'm going to be starting the research hopefully soon. And I call myself a reformed mother. And no doubt that will come out when we speak, but it's basically how discovering how school is doing harm to neurodivergent young people, including the two teenage boys who are, that I have the privilege of calling my children, my sons. I decided to change my approach as a mother as well in the process. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you so much, Fabienne. I know that lots of different topics that we can dive into. But just to frame our initial conversation, I thought it'd be good to define what masking is and from that scientific perspective. So Livingston 2019 described masking as a response to social stigma and the pressure to conform to neurotypical standards, which then often lead to mental health and other challenges. How in 2017 further defined masking as the use of different strategies to compensate for or hide autistic or ADHD traits in social situations, which basically means in a nutshell, masking involves suppressing natural behaviors to fit the expectations of our society. My question is, that's how science will define it. Perhaps a question to you, Fabienne, how would you best describe or define masking in your own words?
So I think being ADHD means that for me, masking is often turning the volume down in terms of how exuberant I naturally am and not allowing that to be too much. So I think the turning down is, I agree with the definition of the masking to fit in a social norm. So I've always, all my life, felt weird, inverted commas. So I've never felt I belonged anywhere, which has been really challenging. And I think that means that if an environment is not safe, I tend to not say much and not really show who I truly am as a person.
So that really quite resonates with you, hiding or masking who you really are. I was also looking at different motivations for masking, and again looking at it from research, there's different reasons why neurodivergent people mask. So one is assimilation, One of the primary motivations was this desire to, as they say, this is directly from research, blend in with the normals and avoid standing out due to social and communication differences or any unique behaviors or interests. And in this particular study, participants even felt pressure to change their behavior in order to seem normal enough. There's other motivations which are much more pragmatic, for example, in terms of what's behind neurodivergent masking, such as pragmatic reasons, improving employment opportunities or in educational settings, or around safety, avoiding being bullied or being ostracized by society. And thirdly, another one was to increase connection and relationship with other people, so that masking was a way to overcome initial social obstacles and then facilitate either development of friendships or romantic relationships. And I have a really powerful quote from a study from a 46-year-old female. She said that connections have to be made initially on neurotypical terms, then hopefully on my terms as well. So it's quite a powerful statement and also quite sad. And I was wondering if any of these motivations for masking, does any of this sound familiar to you, Fabienne, and your motivations for masking, feeling the need to have to?
So one thing I haven't caveated everything that I'm sharing here is my version of ADHD and my version of masking. So I think that's quite important, because I think we all do ourselves, right? Inverted commas. So I think for me, it's really important to caveat everything I'm saying as this is Fabienne's version of doing masking. And the other thing I also wanted to share is I've not long had a diagnosis. So I've only officially received a diagnosis last year when I started my PhD. So upon sort of discussing with my supervisor, one of my supervisors is actually an ADHD researcher. When I was talking to her, she recommended getting a diagnosis, which really helped. So having prefaced everything I'm about to say with that, I think I really resonate with the idea of fitting in. So definitely masking to not think, well, for people not to think I'm weird. So I feel weird inside, but it's always been I'll just come in and sort of try and fit in. And that quote from the lady, I think it's very powerful, because friendship has always been a big issue for me all of my life, and particularly making very close connections to people. So finding they're rare. I can probably count on my hands the people I'm really, really close to and I feel able to really share with. And those people are very extra special. And I make sure that they know they're special.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And actually, there are so many different techniques. And when I was doing the research over the years, how people mask and what is used in masking, I thought it would be useful with a focus on ADHD in today's talk to just look at some of the different ways that people mask and the symptoms that might show up. So if we look at ADHD in the predominantly inattentive ADHD type, which is linked to difficulty of focusing or trouble listening or during conversations or organizational skills or forgetfulness or lack of time management. One example of masking in the inattentive type is behavior known as stimming. So this is a behavior which is self-soothing or self-stimulating, and it can involve making the same movements or actions or making the same sounds repeatedly. And examples of that include rocking back and forth or humming or grinding your teeth when it comes to stimming. Another examples, and maybe you can listen out to some that resonate with you, of the inattentive ADHD masking can include coming up with excuses for being late or distracted, but without having any harmful intention, putting in twice the amount of effort and time than others to achieve a particular goal, working extra hard to complete tasks right before the deadline, certainly guilty of that one, checking your work multiple times before submission, focusing intensely during a conversation to actually keep up with what is being said, being extra early to events to avoid being late, having multiple alarms or reminders set up, and also writing everything down. So that's on the inattentive ADHD type. On the hyperactive ADHD ADHD type typically involves fidgeting, talking excessively, being unable to wait your turn, or being unable to sit still. Some examples here are staying silent in conversations or being extra cautious with the words you use, or suppressing your energy to appear really calm, or suppressing your urge to fidget or to stim, and also bottling really strong emotions up and not being able to express those. And I was just wondering, as I was listing those from the two different ADHD types, if any of those particular masking techniques, so to speak, resonate with you and your experience, Fabienne.
Yes. Quite a few. So you can't see me, but I'm sitting here with my leg literally just moving constantly. That's something that I do an awful lot, particularly when I have to concentrate, like here. So on the Zoom call, I have to find a way for my energy to be more grounded. Again, I'll caveat that one of the things of getting a late diagnosis is that throughout my life I've had to learn tools and strategies to help and support with what I saw as challenges with myself, problems I had. The beauty of that is I've got things that I know help, and it's really good. I really struggle with the listening, particularly if I'm in a big group and there's loads of people around, because it's like listening to sort of 5 or 6, imagine there's like 5 or 6 conversations in the background. I will be hearing those 5 or 6 conversations loud, like I'm hearing our conversation. And that means that I have to, if I find something more interesting in another conversation, then I'll be naturally wanting to go and listen to that. Or here, there's a window in the room where I am, and I can see people walking past. So I'm really focusing on not looking at the people as they walk past. That's something that I would do. So all of those things in terms of trying to find ways to hide what's going on is really difficult. And I think the outcome for me, I'm sure we'll talk about that later, is the drain. Like it's a real drain on the body, or in terms of energy. So if I'm in a call, after this call, I'll have to go out and walk for a little bit to just shake it all off and get my energy back.
It's so interesting how many different ways and different to, again, to what I described, how many different ways you use to mask and to feel comfortable and what shows up. I actually have a question for the audience, if anyone could engage with this one. I just wondered, what do you think research says when it comes to masking in terms of where it might be more prevalent in autism or ADHD? And if anyone would like to guess as to the percentages of how high masking is in both autism and ADHD. Does anyone feel brave to guess or put in the chat?
Sorry, Tijana, do you mind repeating the question, please?
Yeah, so we were going to compare where masking is mostly prevalent, and if you can hazard a guess, if you think it's mostly in autism or if it's higher in ADHD, what percentage of people feel the need to mask according to research? Okay, so we have one guess, higher in ADHD, higher in autism. Any ideas as to how high does it go? What percentage of people? 90% ADHD. Okay, that's quite high. That's almost everyone. Anyone else? What would you say, Fabienne, in terms of where do you think?
Well, I'm surrounded by a lot of other neurodivergent people, and I would say autistic and ADHD people mask, but possibly in different ways. Yeah, but I would imagine it's pretty high. I mean, every day I mask. It's rare that people get to see the real me.
Really, yeah, and you make a good point, because these are extremely high numbers. So research shows that autistic individuals mask up to 94% report masking, and research on ADHD is closer to 70%, still an enormous amount of people that feel that they can't be their authentic selves. In terms of why autistic individuals mask more, it's really three things: social expectations, stigma, and gender differences. So social expectations, autistic individuals often face even greater pressures to conform to social norms, and some of their differences are more visible in social settings. When it comes to stigma as well, autism is often really misunderstood, and this leads to more intense efforts to blend in with other people. And gender differences, autistic women in particular are likely to mask more as they face even higher societal expectations. So that was interesting observations, but in any case, it means that 3/4 and above of all neurodivergent ADHD or autistic people feel the need to they have to mask. I was also going to go through some, I think, common misconception, and as someone who's not neurodivergent, I know that I was certainly guilty of some of these. Only a few years ago, I didn't really understand some of the things, so I thought it'd be quite interesting to bring up. And again, I mean, if any of this resonates, do jump in to say. So one misconception is that masking means that ADHD symptoms are not severe, whereas the reality is that masking hides struggles but doesn't really reduce the severity of having ADHD. Another one was that only women mask ADHD, and anyone mask regardless of gender. One that I was guilty of is that masking is always intentional. So I thought that it was something that you do as choice. Whereas, of course, it can be completely unconscious and you can only recognize it later in hindsight or perhaps even after a diagnosis. So it's not a choice at all. It is a survival mechanism. It is a coping mechanism and not a lack of authenticity. And another one is that often people think that masking is a sign of success, that you're able to mask, to adapt. But while that might be helpful in the short term, it leads to long-term emotional cost. And finally, this one really close to my heart is that masking could be seen as same as adapting. So again, for neurotypicals, it is often I hear that everyone has to conform to social norms. So what's the difference between masking in neurodivergent individuals versus adapting to social norms for neurotypicals? And I think this is really important to understand that masking suppresses traits at a personal cost and adapting is much more natural. How do we differentiate between the two? So the key difference is that masking is hiding neurodivergent traits at a very high cost, while adapting is learning, integrating socially acceptable behaviors without any emotional strain to ourselves. And if I just give you some quick overview, you'll see how they differ quite a lot. So, for example, in ADHD, the effort to mask is high. It's a very high emotional cognitive strain. It can be exhausting. For neurotypicals, adapting to social norms, it can be less taxing, more natural, more sustainable. When it comes to authenticity, so it can be in ADHD, it can feel inauthentic, like acting or suppressing your true self. Whereas for neurotypicals, it doesn't really compromise any of our core identity and it feels more genuine. Longer term in ADHD, it can lead to burnout, anxiety, depression, or even a delayed diagnosis, whereas for neurotypicals, it's generally neutral or it could be positive. There's no significant harm from adapting to social norms. And finally, when it comes to self-awareness, in ADHD, masking can be quite unconscious or can be only partially recognized, whereas usually neurotypicals, it is an intentional and conscious effort to mask. So while on the surface, it might seem that there's some similarities. Actually, when you dig deep, they are quite different and come with a much higher small cost in being able to mask. And I was wondering what kind of an effort or what strain is it to mask for you, Fabienne? How high is that?
I guess it depends on what the day holds or what I'm doing. So for me, the hardest are definitely group gatherings, particularly, I mean, you were saying something around feeling safe. And so I think if I feel like I've got a safe and secure environment, then that's definitely easier. If it isn't, then my default will automatically to go sort of quite silent. So my friends Like my really close friends finds it quite amusing because sees more of the real me, and I can be quite loud and jokey. But in those social situations, I'll get really withdrawn and deciding what's next, and that always means that I need time on my own afterwards. Again, over the years, I've learned to find ways of helping with that. So for me, I need my walk in nature on my own without a dog. The family knows, so they always leave me alone and they let me go and do that to recharge my batteries. But it can also lead to me needing to go and have a nap because I'm just completely drained. So I think the safer the environment, the better. And that's the beauty of getting older, is that I'm not afraid to say no to things. So I don't really socialize in big groups unless I really, really want to do it, because I don't have to. I don't need to put my nervous system through all the stress.
Well, thank you. You actually hit upon something which also research supports, that 60% of neurodivergent individuals feel absolutely exhausted after social interactions due to the effort of masking. And when I looked at some comparisons to neurotypical experiences, of course, not to masking, but to social interactions, research shows that it's about 20% of neurotypical adults feel mentally fatigued after social interactions, but mostly ones that requires very significant effort, so such as networking events or public speaking or something like that. So you can see that even there, it is quite a large discrepancy. And even when you look deeper, what is the difference between being exhausted or drained after a big event as a neurotypical or a neurodivergent? It's really the frequency. So for neurotypical, it might just be occasional, whereas in neurodivergence, it's chronic. So it might be after every single social interaction. It can be the intensity. So in neurotypical, it could be mild to moderate fatigue, whereas in ADHD, it is an absolute severe exhaustion, and it can lead to burnout as well. And the recovery time. So even if as a neurotypical, you might feel that something is really exhausting, it's usually a very short recovery time. So it can be just a few hours or overnight, so in a day, whereas for in ADHD, autism, and neurodivergence, it can be days, weeks, much prolonged. So again, something that seems quite similar on the surface is actually quite different when you look at it in more depth. And another thing I was conscious of, and I think we touched upon at the beginning, was that masking does affect mental health. And I was wondering if, in your experience, how does this show up, if it has had any effect on your mental well-being or your well-being?
Yes, sadly. And again, that's part of the reason obviously, because I didn't have the diagnosis. I interpreted what was going on as though there's a problem with me and my mental health, and hence doing all of the explorations I've done over the years, and training in mindfulness, because I find meditation really helps me, for example. So yeah, it's definitely affected me. I think we're talking about specifically masking, but there are so many elements also of the condition, or the system calls it a disorder. I tend to call it a flow rather than disorder, but that's my choice. And so one thing I was thinking when I was hearing you share is the fact that with the masking also comes the reason I find it really challenging to be with other people in a room is that I'm always worried about how I'm received. So afterwards, I was replaying a conversation thinking, oh, they've reacted like this because maybe what I said or how I was. So there's the masking in the moment, but then there's the thinking afterwards that happens that is also draining, because it re-puts you back into that element. And I think also in terms of the mental health issue is I experience very highs, like quite a lot of highs, but also really a lot of lows. And when I get those lows, then the masking is perhaps more intense than when I feel a bit on top of the world.
I think what I'm hearing is that, masking does help navigate these social, professional settings, but it does come at a cost. And this is because ADHD brains already work harder to regulate attention, emotions, impulses, and then masking, further overburdens executive functions which can lead to stress, anxiety, even identity loss. And I think this is a nice seg into some of the neuroscience of masking and looking at potentially some of the brain regions that are involved in masking. So I think three main ones would be the prefrontal cortex, which is overworked, as we said, during masking. Then we have the amygdala, which has a heightened activity due to stress or fear of judgment. And if we think a little bit further, sort of the role of the amygdala is this brain's emotional processing center, and it's responsible for detecting threats or, triggering stress responses. And the impact of masking is that masking often occurs as a response to either fear or judgment or rejection or social failure, which can then activate the amygdala. And then chronic activation during masking leads to heightened anxiety or can lead to stress. And over time, this can contribute to either this feeling of pure emotional exhaustion or burnout. Another thing that is impacted is that when you suppress your natural behavior, this reduces the activity in the brain region called the default mode network, which is crucial for our creativity or for self-reflection. And the default mode network is a network of interconnected brain regions, so different brain regions that activates during rest, or we said self-reflection or internal thought processes like daydreaming or when you imagine the future. And when you have natural behaviors that are suppressed, i.e. when you mask, the default mode network's activities then reduced, which can contribute to this feeling of disconnection or mental fatigue. And essentially what masking does is it dampens the default mode network, and it limits the ability to support, for example, self-awareness or creative thinking. So that is suppressed. And another, I think, quite important way in which masking work is, there was a study in 2018 which found that chronic stress due to masking dysregulates the HPA axis and increases cortisol and also burnout risk. And just a quick review, the HPA axis is our body's stress response. So when you're stressed, the hypothalamus signals to the pituitary gland, which then tells the adrenal glands to release cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and it helps you cope. And this is really useful in the short term, so like in a presentation, like now. But chronic stress due to, for example, masking, it keeps those cortisol levels quite high, which can again lead to burnout or fatigue or any other health issues. And if I can think of an analogy, it's like having a car alarm. And so it's helpful for a brief amount of time, but it would be very exhausting if it never stops. So that's the quick overview of the regions in the brain that are involved in masking. And I was then wondering, a lot of what I said is quite negative. Masking impacts the brain and all these regions not in a positive way. And I'm wondering if you've ever reflected on this, could masking ever be beneficial to you, or has it been beneficial, or is it always just a survival strategy?
I think I saw a comment earlier on, someone mentioning about hiding positives of masking or, hiding positive traits. And I think I resonate quite, that Lina said, I think I resonate with that. So actually sometimes masking, whilst it's draining, it's also helped me feel safe. So it's my way of creating my own safety zone in an environment. So in a way, the reason the masking happens is because if I don't feel safe in particular, then I'll do that to protect myself. So yeah, it's draining and it's challenging, but over the years, it's been really helpful. And I think now it's practiced as in, I'm not going to comment, so therefore that's all good. Okay.
So it's got its kind of times when it's helpful, but as we spoke, kind of it does come at a great personal cost. And perhaps you've mentioned trust, and there are certain environments where you might be more likely to unmask or feel more comfortable to be yourself. Would there be any areas or instances where you would be more comfortable to unmask?
Well, I think for me, I it's not safe to totally unmask in any of the settings that are very ableist. So a lot of the systems like the university where I used to work, I didn't feel safe to unmask or to just be me. I have really good friends and they get pretty much to see as close as possible. I mean, can you ever know someone fully? I don't know. I think the only person who knows yourself is you, right? But I would say I'm pretty much with my family, like my husband and our 2 boys who are also neurodivergent. I'm very much me. And then with my very close friends, they all tend to be women, and I can count them on one hand, and they know me quite well, so they're always there to support me, and I'm so grateful to have them in my life because I'm definitely where I am because of their presence and their love and support.
Thank you for sharing. It does make a difference. It sounds that where there is trust and that comfort and lack of judgment, that's really helpful. It's true that research says that most of the masking is done in environments where there are high social or professional expectations, where there is lots of pressure to conform. So if we look at how this is in different settings, for example, in the workplace, it can be that you suppress your impulsivity, you over-prep, force focus. In an educational setting, you might decide to stay quiet, or you could be overcompensating, for example, also mimicking your peers. Social interactions, another very prevalent, tending to follow conversations, and suppressing hyperactivity. And even within families or close relationships, hiding those struggles to avoid either conflict or being criticized, or in high-stake situations where you might tend to over-rehearse, suppress any fidgeting so that it's not known. And there is research that says, unsurprisingly, that 85% of neurodivergent individuals say they would feel more comfortable unmasking in environments that are understanding and most of all accommodating to their needs. So that does make a difference. I have a few more research studies which said what can be done, what is helpful, and we can also hear your thoughts of what might be helpful. There was a study in 2020 that showed that a supportive social environment enhances prefrontal cortex function, and that helps you self-regulate, and that having inclusive spaces, the workplace, universities, reduces the need to feel like you have to mask. And then it also minimizes this overwhelming sensory overload, and promotes a feeling of emotional safety. There is another study, I believe, in 2017 that found that when you reduce sensory stimuli, this lowers the amygdala activation, and that also helps individuals to focus. When you are in a safe environment, this increases oxytocin levels. Oxytocin promotes trust, the ability to socially bond with your peers, and of course then it potentially reduces the kind of defensive behaviors that we might all put. And finally, there is research that says that within an organization that implements an inclusive practice, there is a report of a 30% increase in productivity and innovation among its neurodivergent employees when inclusive practices are put in. So in terms of thinking what would be a helpful thing for you, or what helps, you said trust. What other practical things could be helpful for you or would help in terms of being able to even build that trust or feel comfortable to get to a point where you'd feel more likely to be authentic?
I think very recently, because of my PhD and my research, I've started being far more authentic, particularly on LinkedIn. So almost like, I'm done with trying to be someone else. That comes with its own issues in terms of then worrying about how you're received by others. But what's been really helpful is definitely the PhD, and then having an amazing supervisor who's an ADHD specialist and who's been really supportive means that I've now got a lot more of, that's why this happens, right? A bit like we're doing today, having the theory or the understanding to then see how that manifests as your lived experience has been really helpful, because more and more, particularly with the work I'm doing because of the PhD and the lack of well-being, I see how many of us neurodivergent people are unhappy because of the ableist system we've created. There's a part of me that is going, well, okay, rather than trying to fit in the world you've created, I'm going to be me. And if you can't cope with me, then the onus is on you, not on me. I don't have to fit in your map of the world anymore. So that's been really helpful to make the conscious decision that I don't have to fit in an ableist world and ableist system. It's okay for me to be me. I'm okay.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. In terms of, I guess, what is often suggested that there are certain things that can be done so that you don't have to feel like that and living in that ableist society. One of them, mostly for neurotypical people, is really around education, which is what we're doing today. A lot of it is that people just don't know. They're not aware and they don't understand the impact. They think it's much less. So whether you can either learn about neurodiversity or masking or the impact of it, it's really quite helpful. I've heard from you the ability to create a safe space. This might mean perhaps having some sort of sensory friendly or flexible adaptive environments that come as standard rather than something that constantly has to be requested and adapted. And this would help normalize some of the differences that exist. Also, this feeling that it's okay to ask, so not to make assumptions, and then to respect any preferences, any needs that other people have, and be patient, because of course I've picked up from quite a few times that you said trust and safety, and this is not something that can be rushed and that comes very quickly. And each one of us can challenge that stigma, perhaps speak up for any change within our own circle of influence and be able to create a more fair, level playing field for everyone. And just being supportive. As you've said, there's a small group of people within your circle who are supportive, and this makes a huge difference. And I think with that, there is actually one final research that I read, and it says that 90% of neurodivergent individuals say that even one supported person in their life makes a significant difference in their ability to unmask. So that's one person. And I really thought about it, could I be that one person? Could you be that person, any one of us? Because it takes so little to be able to make a difference before we start making sort of some bigger systematic changes. So I think that's really stayed with me, that even research supports it. It doesn't take many people, just one person that is supportive is huge. Yeah, that was my last point. I was going to hand over to Fabienne for any last takeaways or insights, but I'm happy to go on to any questions.
No, I echo what you've said. Yes, just one person. And I think everybody, we can all be, rather than just jumping onto the let's criticize, judge or compare, how about just being curious why someone would be behaving in the way they are and making them feel like you're okay, you can be you. I just wish all my life I'd been told the opposite of what I've been told. Rather than being told you're too much, just tone it down. I've been told, you're okay and you're good enough as you are. I think that would have been a much big difference to how I show up in the world today. And I would have had to spend a lot less money on actually healing journey as well. That would have been good.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fabienne.
Thank you so much, Tijana and Fabienne. We do have quite a few questions. It seems best if you'd like to go ahead and ask. Hi, Angelo.
Okay, hello. Yes, my question was about the type of masking, how Fabienne feels it expresses in a conscious or intentional way, because I heard Tijana's comment that neurodivergent and neurotypical people have different ways of masking. So that's what I would like to ask. And most of all, if I may, Fabienne, sorry, it's personal, but why did it come so late that people told you that you had ADHD?
So the reason I got the diagnosis late is because I started a PhD and I was really, really struggling to fit in the system. really struggling. And when I sought support, the answer was you can't have support unless you get a diagnosis.
I guess many people struggle with PhDs. You
Yeah, no,
already
but
had other
yeah.
degrees.
Sorry,
You had other degrees. You were not struggling for those degrees.
I was.
You were. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you were not aware that there was something that was different from other people.
Well, no, because of the differences back then, I was told the problem was with me.
Okay.
So I just internalized that the problem was with me, that all the issues I had were my problem, not that there were that there were things that could be done for to help me accommodate some of my
Yeah,
challenges.
but still, I mean, it's so many years. Somebody could have detected that beforehand and make your life easier.
I wish, yeah, but in France, I grew up in France. In France, they don't believe in ADHD, so nobody would have diagnosed me with ADHD.
Okay. Thank you. I was
Yeah,
curious
so
because
like you talk to a psychiatrist in France, they don't believe in ADHD. So it's only just slowly getting looked at.
probably
Yeah.
in my times, every bad student it was his fault that he was a bad student. Now it's not like this anymore. But I'm surprised to hear that in France, this is still going on.
Yeah. Oh, but they don't really like the medication for ADHD and all of those things. The psychiatrists are quite vocal. It's changing.
Strange.
It's changing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for
No problem.
for this discussion. I was really curious from the beginning. I mean, with first things first for me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Angelo. Satish, you had a question?
I was just making a comment about why I tend to mask.
Do you want to share your comment? I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is because I feel any errors would be attributed de facto to my quote unquote disorder disability rather than accounting for the normal margins of error for that task itself. So for example, when I'm very excited, which is quite often, obviously I miss small details. I'm like always looking at the big picture. And so it's very easy to just say, oh, that's because, I have ADHD. Even for myself, right? Even for justifying it to myself, it's very difficult. So it's better not to go in the direction, reveal that and say, oh, okay, I just forgot it, or I made a mistake, I'll do better. So that's a kind of, not entirely for criticism, but for accountability, right? To say that I am accountable, but I am responsible in a way. That's my take on it, why I mask.
You touch upon something really interesting, Satish. It's kind of the benefit, the pros and cons of being diagnosed and knowing, which we're thinking of as one of our next talks. But yes, that accountability, where does it end? Where does it start? When you know that you have a condition, is it easier to just attribute everything to it? But of course, it's not. Not everything can be attributed, but it is a fine line where where would it fall, and how would you, as an individual, know what's the difference. And I think that was exactly the plan, to speak to other neurodivergent individuals and say, how do you know what is attributed, to your ADHD and what is just the personality trait, something else.
I think I would like to just follow up about how did you know, or why did it take so long for the diagnosis? I think it also is the same reason. At some point, everybody has a struggle. Everybody struggles with education. Everybody struggles with pressure. Everybody has challenges. But when the normal mechanisms of support, normal mechanisms of remediation only seem to temporarily help, and it feels like no matter how many times I do, I'm in a loop. I eventually come back here, right? And then it eventually dawns like, oh no, something else needs to be done. By that time, it is oneself that makes that realization and says, oh, others just may see it as a deviant behavior in some way, either disability, disorder, inability. But then you will realize, no. I'm so good at some things. I'm so planned and all that. Only I can know that it's not a problem of motivation. Only I can know it is not a problem of willpower. And still I see failure happening. And then I realize, oh, I have to seek some support. That is the reason for late diagnosis, because most of the time it is that self a realization that something else has to happen, which is why it gets in situations where there is extreme external pressure, which is mostly self-inflicted. Because for ADHD like me, I am ambitious. I'm like always trying to do more than I can handle, but that kind of reveals itself in a way. So.
Thank you, Satish. So we have a few more questions. Sorry, you go ahead, Lena.
Yes, so it is always, for me, it is always negative in a way, but I think there are a lot of people who are masking, especially female, you're hiding more your positive sides, but it is a topic which is not studied yet, probably. Or the side of hiding positive traits.
So would you like to give an example of something that, for example, would be positive that you would be, I guess, masking or not wanting to show up?
Yeah, just hiding how intelligent you are. If you're in a group with especially males, it is expected, for example, in Germany, it is expected of me not to know anything about engineering or mathematics, which is, yeah. And that would be a decision for me because I do have engineering degree just to hide and not to say something, or just in one case, I actually really had to go home, bring my engineering degree, put it on the table and say, now you do what I'm telling you, because I do have that knowledge and you have to change something in my car because I'm telling you there is an issue in the car. So that's hiding too, no, in a sense.
I hear exactly what you say. And you're right. I mean, whether you're hiding something that is a positive trait, but is not, it's really how it's perceived by society. So if it's something that I guess in this, mostly neurotypical world that it wouldn't be well received, then that's what most people decide that it's not in line with expectations of our society, whether it's good or bad. They might personally think that, there's nothing wrong with it. And often they, of course, don't, whereas they think this is how normal should look like. So I need to do this in order to appear normal enough. But no, you're right. They don't need to be obviously just negative. I hear you. It could be a good thing that you're masking, but it's still suppressing yourself.
Yeah. Are there any studies studying misalignment between more emotional clues which you're receiving? Because if between that what verbally is said and emotional misalignment, then you may receive it like negative and you will be really confused.
So really translating, like picking up on nuances in how people speak or what they're trying to relay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there definitely would be, because that's some of the work is really in that translating, I think, between the neurotypical and the neurodivergent word and how they communicate and why so often that there's, a person wants to say something and it's often misunderstood, or they pick up on communication or verbal or non-verbal communication from someone and it's not their experience. So I can definitely look up to see what is out there, but I think it would have been definitely
just misalignment between the verbal and emotional sense, how we can communicate, because most of the time it is not aligned, which you're getting confused. If your brain is wired to process more, in a sense, than a normal one, does it make sense?
I listened to a audio book the other day, and it said there was a study, and I can't tell you which one, but I can find it. And it said that in the study, the participants, some were autistic, some were not. And it was seeing how quickly, without talking, without doing anything, just a very, very brief interaction, can it be picked up that someone is neurodivergent. And it is unbelievable how high it was. So even without almost doing anything, how quickly it can be picked up that there's a difference in non-verbal, perhaps some verbal, or even where you stand, anything. And I'm not going to say into, but it was a very high number how quickly it was picked up by the neurotypicals and thought. And when they wrote, what was it? They would say the person just looked off, or they looked weird, or there was something about them. And you couldn't name it, but there's that difference in how it's perceived, that there's a social misalignment of something. But yeah, it would be great to break that down and understand what is it exactly that makes us pick up on these nuances.
So from my own experience, I also believe there should be the difference how someone processes your own feeling. and where the mirror neurons are activated, and you believe it is your feelings, but it is not your feelings. Does it make sense?
So you take on from someone else's and you own it like it's
Yes.
like it's your own.
It is not your own. To figure that out, for some individuals, that would be really difficult to pick up because you believe it is your own feelings or your own reaction, but it is not. But thank you so much for this topic.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we're more than welcome to continue on in the special interest group if you're there. That'd be lovely. I saw a question from Hema.
There is a question from Hema. There's also a couple from Paulina. Hema, you're here.
Yes.
I'm here. Hello. I thank you. Honestly, that was so insightful to listen to a chat between somebody who identifies as neurotypical and someone who identifies as neurodivergent, because recently a lot of media is highlighted of neurodivergent individuals. And I was really interested to hear from your side. You identify as a neurotypical individual. Do you ever find that you mask in certain situations?
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. It's good to see you. Do you know what? So this is a chat actually that Fabian and I had, because at the beginning I was thinking, I do this as well. Surely everyone masks. We can't just live in this world where we can do whatever we like. You know, there are norms, expectations of us. So everyone masks. That was my interpretation. However, when I spoke to Fabienne and her experience and then did the research and my experience in the last couple of years, is that the extent of how inauthentic that feels is unimaginable. So for example, you know, if I feel the need to blend in or adapt, I don't feel that is changing my core value. It doesn't feel inauthentic. I just feel that's something that I can easily do. It doesn't feel draining. It doesn't seem to touch me really, and very quickly I can bounce off. So and it's very conscious. It feels very conscious. I know I need to do that. Okay, it doesn't take much effort usually, whereas I think having listened to what masking and how that shows up for neurodivergent individuals, it just seems that it is so overwhelmingly draining. It's so prolonged. It is an experience that is 10 times multiplied to what I would experience it. And it just makes you constantly left feeling weird or like you're different. So yes, while there are some similarities in the experience, I think the degree, the severity of that is huge. And again, if I feel I need to blend it doesn't stay with me. I wouldn't talk about it with my friends, whereas clearly masking is something that is so prevalent and it's such a big thing that goes against who you really are.
Thank you, Hema. If you're happy to continue, Tijana, everyone. A question from Paulina about the introverts. Is there a difference? That question.
Yeah. I was actually thinking about it a long time ago, and I'm suddenly now in this I was not planning to attend. I didn't know if I would, but it was such a great episode. Such a great conversation. I just recently had a conversation with someone how social interactions are high cost for us. And then everybody's always, like in media is like popular kind of label, like someone is introvert, extrovert, avert. So how would you describe people? So like, if it can work for those?
Yeah, I mean, okay, there are some overlaps in terms of what is considered if you're an introvert and you get overwhelmed in a social setting and then you come home and you don't feed off the energy of other people. So that could be aligned with some aspects of neurodivergent experience. But I think if you look at then across the board, this is just one part where it's in line. And I think it's similar. Again, I think the extent is probably slightly higher in neurodivergent, but again, that is a spectrum, so it doesn't have to be. And you can have highly introverted people who don't necessarily have to be neurodivergent. So for example, there are different aspects. Just if I pick on one, so for example, like sensory, generally like sensory sensitivity, it is not really something that you identify with as an introvert, right? Whereas it's quite often a common trait in neurodivergent. So it's not that sensory sensitivity. I'm thinking if there's anything else. Funnily enough, when you said it, Fabian and I had a chat, and I said to her, growing up, would you have considered yourself an introvert? Because she didn't get diagnosed until late. And would that have been your kind of, not solution, but your understanding of to understand who you are. And she said, no, you know what, it just did not align at all with my experience. So I couldn't put myself in that box and say this explains, because that just explained one small aspect of that social side, and she didn't have any of the special interests. So yeah, it didn't align.
And also I'm thinking, because we are also all in some sort of spectrum, and also there's so many people that are like not diagnosed with masked so perfectly that they would never get diagnosis. So yeah, it's like also very complicated to assess this.
I think so. I mean, I'm sure there is some research. What is the intersection between, you know, in being introverted and then having neurodivergence, or are you more likely to, in a group of, if you are an introvert, are you more likely to be diagnosed as neurodivergent? I mean, again, I'm sure there is perhaps some research into that, and that could be quite telling. And then maybe there is quite a significant overlap. But in terms of just the kind of experience, they are different, say, conditions, because one is just a personality trait.
Can I add something to that? She is a bilingual. She grew up in France. So her mother language, in that language, she may be the opposite, extrovert, but then in English, she can be introvert. So you can be both at the same time. I came
Yes,
the bilingualism when I was like looking for that. And that's quite common, that you can be both.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because it just says that you also culturally, you know, depending on the cultural context, you also, I guess, not mask, but try to blend in whatever the cultural norms are of a society. So it's one thing how you behave in France, it's very different how you behave here. So then you kind of adapt to that. So there's so many lenses, and often the research certainly that we look at, it is quite Eurocentric, Western centric. It doesn't have much of that cultural lens, but that is a fascinating, I think, thing to also look at and delve into.
So I do have a few more questions that were listed in the chat, but we could perhaps, I think it's about links and research. So
yeah, I can definitely share those. Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, there was a lot of research I referenced. I have it all. I know it's always good to see where those quotes come from. Have a little look, but there's a lot out there.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tijana. Fabienne, she can't get back on, so she said thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's still here.
Thanks very much for coming, and hopefully see you in the SIG.